"This is your last chance to get out of there," Dr. Miranda said, eyeing Desmond with the same sense of apprehension a dentist might get from looking at a particularly cavity-ridden tooth. "I mean it when I say that something's wrong with it today. I won't take any responsibility for what happens next." That phrase would have been cause for concern coming from anyone. Coming from Dr. Miranda, who had performed so many biological alterations on herself that the concept of species no longer applied, it ought to have been reason enough to sprint to the nearest bus stop, head to the airport, and buy the first ticket to the other side of the planet. She stared unblinkingly at Desmond, wondering whether he'd back out. Desmond, who had so many IVs attached to him that he looked more like a patch of grass than a man, still somehow managed to convey his offense at the suggestion. It was like an angry breeze blowing across a rubber field.
"A week is too long to wait. And anyway, I don't accept excuses from my employees," he said, "unless they're paired with letters of resignation. Do you have one prepared?"
"If my options are to pull the lever and accept the blame, or resign, then you can unhook yourself. There are others who will fund my work." Dr. Miranda wheeled herself away from the control panel and started toward the door. She really would have gone, too. It wasn't necessarily frustration with Desmond. She tried to be above petty arguments, but more about covering liability. Regular malpractice suits were one thing, but a malpractice suit from a billionaire was another thing entirely, and not one she wanted to face. But he did call her back, and she wheeled her way right back over to the blood cycler. This was one of her more recent inventions, from after she'd finished working on Desiana. About once a month, Desmond would come in to get his blood completely replaced. The old blood would enter her blood culture and mix with lots of other blood, all of which she fortified with antibodies and anti-aging gene therapies to make super blood. The entire arrangement cost millions of dollars a year to maintain and operate, in no small part because of Miranda's salary, and it all went to keeping him alive and healthy. The money would have been better spent buying designer puppies and hurling them into different oceans across the globe. Miranda pressed a button on her control panel, and a red light went on above her monitor. "Do you verbally confirm that you accept any medical consequences that may arise as part of this procedure, in full knowledge of the risks associated, and that you waive your right to sue me for any harm incurred during the procedure?" Desmond stared obliquely at her from where he was laying for a few moments, as though he were trying to will the question away. Fortunately, he was completely trapped.
"I do,"
he said. One of Desmond's greatest weaknesses was his utter inability to compromise on the things he wanted. Often it wasn't a weakness at all, because the things he wanted were often the same things that kept him alive. Often, but not always. This meant that when Dr. Miranda told him that something had been wrong with the blood cycler all morning, that she'd wasted the entire day trying to fix it and gotten nowhere, that she needed a week to make sure everything was safe, his only option was to double down. He'd hired Dr. Miranda because she was the best the world had to offer, and he was of the strongest constitution in the world, he thought. There should have been no reason for delay. At first, when she pressed the on button, things seemed to be progressing normally. Blood flowed up half the IV tubes and down the other half in bright red rotation, and Dr. Miranda thought she must have been imagining things. This wasn't entirely uncommon for her. A weak imagination would have made her a poor visionary. The moment she gave her sigh of relief, the previously very stealthy blood clot fully covered the intake valve. It took her a few seconds to notice Desmond's blood pressure rising, because it was still within the normal range at first, but then it was very rapid. Numbers and buzzers and sirens started going haywire, and she made a lunge for the emergency stop button just as Desmond screamed, jostling loose one of the in-pumping IVs. Jolly red rivers sprang from both the loose tube and from Desmond himself, flooding those once austere plains with sweet victory. By the time everything had shut down and she had plugged enough holes to stop the immediate flow, Desmond was unconscious. To those who didn't understand just how many corners Dr. Miranda cut out of the scientific method, she was a miracle worker. One of her hobbies was designing specialized cures for individual strains of the common cold. If she saw someone exhibiting symptoms, she would ask for a mucus sample, and the odds were good that they'd be feeling better in the next 6 hours. But about 1 in 20 of them would develop tumors 6 years down the road. She was more careful in her professional work, the gene therapies, the cancer treatments, and the blood cycler itself, for instance. All that medical talent, the potential to help millions, and she decided to use it to cure Desmond's internal bleeding. He would have been dead within the hour, if not for her. Within the hour! Pain was the first thing Desmond registered when he woke up, followed closely by a typed sheet of paper taped to the ceiling above his head that read, "I told you." Desmond would have scowled at it if he had the energy, but even opening his eyes had taken more work than he anticipated. He was the kind of tired that most closely resembled dead. Not actually dead. In the absence of any other options, he started to listen. Dr. Miranda, although he couldn't be completely sure it was her, was seated only a few feet away working on something quiet. He wouldn't have heard her at all if not for the occasional clicks of whatever she was doing. That was because she only barely needed to breathe anymore, and she certainly didn't need to do it loudly. That, along with her almost zero metabolism, had resulted in muscle atrophy, but she didn't need to be able to walk or lift anything particularly heavy to pursue her passions. The clicks were rhythmic but spaced far apart, one every few seconds. She was reassembling her machine after a thorough cleaning, but he had no way of knowing that, and he wasn't technically minded enough to surmise it, so he remained in ignorance. He wasn't even willing to ask because that would have meant admitting that he didn't know. All he could do was stay right there and wait for something to happen. "I told you so," Dr. Miranda said without looking over.
"Felt the need to say it again, did you?"
He could only barely manage to speak at all. "Don't you think I'm entitled to say whatever I want after an impromptu, life-saving surgery?" Desmond's insides felt like they'd all been mixed together, like there would have been no cleanly sectioned organs if she were to open him up and look. Only a coarse sludge with unidentifiable chunks.
"I never gave you permission to do surgery of any kind."
"Not to worry," she said. "I thought of that. If you decide that you'd rather the surgery be undone, say the word and I can have a lethal injection for you within 5 minutes. Top quality service and certainly no waiting." It was then that something miraculous happened. Desmond, racked with heart-splitting pain, filled all at once with too much blood and too little, and utterly, completely defeated, found himself at a loss for words. There was no insult to sling here, nothing that he could thrust in Dr. Miranda's face that would make her feel worse without directly ignoring the recorded truth of his waiver and looking even more stupid than he already did. Defeat was a bitter, unfamiliar taste, and he had no way of compartmentalizing it. Dr. Miranda began to hum. It wasn't really any song in particular, just a string of long, discordant notes. It might have barely qualified as a melody, if a single blotch of red paint with rough edges counted as a painting. Still, at least it wasn't the song about the daisies.
"Can you please stop that?"
Desmond said after a few minutes, once he'd managed to register through the pain that someone was doing something close to performance art. Dr. Miranda, who hadn't even realized she was humming, stopped without a word.
How long am I going to be like this?
It was, perhaps, one of the more intense procedures I've ever done. I expect you'll be down for at least, 2 weeks.
2 weeks?
That's 2 weeks before you can walk. I'd recommend a few months before you get back in the cycler. We don't want anything popping open in there if we can help it. It wasn't death, but at least it was something. Humans have a saying, if it bleeds, it can die. This is often applied toward figures of towering scale or godlike stature, so far beyond the might of any one human that such sayings are necessary. Desmond hardly met those criteria, but he certainly did bleed.